My name is Earl Hutchins. I'm 58 years old, and I have worked with my hands since I was 19. Last November, at my son's dinner party in Waterloo, my daughter-in-law leaned across the kitchen island and said to my son, loud enough that the sound carried down the hall to where I was standing, "Can't he wear something without a logo on it? He looks like he's here to fix the boiler." My son looked at the floor. He said, "I'll handle it." 32 years running pipe for a living. 32 winters, starting trucks in the dark, and pulling thermal tape off copper fittings with hands that haven't been fully warm since 2003. I wore my Union jacket that night because it's the only good thing I own that doesn't belong on a job site. UA Local 67 crest on the left chest, my last name stitched in yellow thread above the right pocket. I wore it to my wife's funeral. I wore it to my son's convocation. I wore it that night because it was what I had. My son heard her say it. My son said he'd handle it. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. None of them took more than 12 minutes. Not one of them involved raising my voice. Every single one was completely within my legal rights. By the following Thursday, my daughter-in-law couldn't understand why her husband's bank was suddenly asking questions nobody had ever asked before. Before I take you back to that night, take a second to like and subscribe. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? I read everyone. Now let me take you back to the second Saturday of November and a dinner party where I drove an hour up the 401 and came home carrying something I hadn't arrived with. My son called me on a Wednesday. He talked for 3 minutes about the weather between Guelph and Waterloo before I understood he was working up to something. "Just a small dinner," he said. "Nothing formal." He said it again a moment later. "Really, it's just dinner." And once more, quieter, like a man talking himself into a jump. "Just dinner, okay, Dad?" I stood in my kitchen and looked out at the yard. My truck with the Hutchins mechanical decal on the door. A length of black iron pipe I'd been meaning to move for 2 weeks. The extension ladder I've had so long the paint on the top rail is gone down to bare aluminum. "What time?" I asked. 7. A pause. I heard him breathing. "Dad, wear something, you know, nice." I said I would. He said thanks like a man setting down something heavy. After I hung up, I went and stood in front of my closet for a while. 4 flannel shirts, 2 pairs of work pants, 1 pair of dark trousers I bought for my wife's funeral in 2009, which I haven't worn since, and the Union jacket, navy, the local 67 crest on the left chest, Hutchins over the right pocket in yellow thread that used to be brighter, a small burn mark near the cuff from a welding job in Elmira 3 years back. I'd stitched the lining myself where it tore. I ironed it. You're not supposed to iron the crest patch, but I did it anyway. It hung on the door hook and it looked right to me. It looked like a man who'd spent his life doing something that mattered. I didn't know it wasn't enough. Nobody had thought to tell me. Before I left, I noticed a manila envelope on the kitchen table. TD Bank letterhead, thick with paper. My son had dropped it off 2 weeks before. I'd been meaning to go through it. I set it aside and walked out the door. My son and his wife live in a subdivision off Fisher-Hallman. New build, detached 2-story. The kind of street where the snowblowers all match and nobody leaves their bins out past Tuesday. I pulled up 2 houses down, not out of shame. I just didn't want my truck with the dented rear bumper and the company logo standing next to their cars, making a point I hadn't planned to make. I walked up with a bottle of wine, a Niagara Riesling, about $32, chosen with help from a woman at the LCBO who was kind about it. I'd been setting aside a little since August. My daughter-in-law opened the door. She glanced at the bottle, then at the jacket, and her face arranged itself into something polite that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You made it. Let me take that." She took the wine out of my hand and walked it past the dining table, past 6 open bottles with French labels and foil seals, and set it on the back counter behind the coffee station. It stayed there all night. I watched it from across the room. There were 8 people in that living room. I was the only one who had ever been on the wrong end of a burst pipe at -25. Her colleague from the firm was there, the one they were hoping to impress, a property developer named Clive Arden, 60, silver-haired, the kind of man who makes rooms organize themselves around him without his asking. Her firm was pitching the architectural package on his mixed-use development out in Cambridge. It was the kind of file that makes or breaks a junior partner track. I stood by the bookshelf and did what I always do in rooms where I don't know the language. I listened. Somebody mentioned the nursery around 9 o'clock, and I said something about being partway through a rocking chair for the baby. Black walnut from a barn teardown in Fergus. Mortise and tenon joints, no hardware. My daughter-in-law paused for half a second, then smiled at the table, not at me. That's so sweet. We went with something from a Danish company, but I'm sure we'll find a place for yours. Find a place for yours. I sat with that sentence a moment. I've heard versions of it in other rooms. It means the same thing every time. Around 8:45, I went to get a glass of water. The kitchen door was half open. I heard her voice first. She had my son by the sleeve. Can't he wear something without a logo on it? He looks like he's here to fix the boiler. She wasn't whispering. Or maybe she thought the noise from the dishwasher would carry it. He embarrasses me. He embarrasses us. My son said, I know, I'm sorry, I'll handle it. Handle it. I stood in that doorway for 3 seconds, and I want to be honest with you about what I felt because it surprised me too. I wasn't angry. I went clear. When you've got a system that's been running wrong for years, corrosion you've learned to work around, a fitting that weeps just enough that you put a rag under it and forget about it. There's a moment you open the wall and see it plain. No more guessing, just the pipe. I walked in. They turned. Her face went pale, and his went gray, and neither of them said a word. I set my glass down on the counter. I said, of course. I meant it in a particular way. Then I walked out through the kitchen, out the side door into the garage. My jacket was on top of the dryer, folded face down so you couldn't read the name, next to a cardboard box with Dawn 8 written on the side in black marker. I had replumbed their basement the autumn before. 2 weekends in October, replaced the old cast iron stack, ran new PEX through the crawl space, fixed a pressure issue that had been costing them money on every water bill. My son had offered to pay me. I told him not to insult me. I had worn that jacket both weekends. I picked it up. I turned it over, Hutchins, yellow thread going the color of old paper. I put it on, every button. I walked out the front door and nobody followed me. They thought of course meant I had agreed. 32 years in the trades teaches you exactly one thing above everything else. You don't argue with a live system. You shut the valve. I got home by 10:15. I made coffee, that's what I do before an early call, and something in me had already decided I was on one. I sat down at the kitchen table. The TD envelope was where I'd left it. I opened it. Commercial Guarantee Agreement. Signed by me in March 2022. Principal amount, $240,000. Business operating loan. Borrower, Hutchins and Wade Design Build Inc. Guarantor, Earl G. Hutchins. Collateral secured against my property at 44 Crestwood Crescent, Guelph. Free and clear since 2016. My son had started the firm 2 years earlier. Sustainable residential design. Good niche, growing market in Ontario. But a 2-year-old firm with thin margins and no hard assets doesn't get a commercial operating line on its own merit. The bank had looked at my son and passed. Then the bank had looked at me. 32 years clean. A house paid off, a shop free and clear. They didn't lend to my son, they lent to my name. He'd always known that, his wife had never asked. Underneath the guarantee was a refinancing notice, and a paragraph I'd read 3 times in the past 2 weeks without it landing properly. The guarantor may elect to withdraw from the personal guarantee instrument upon refinancing, provided written notice is submitted no later than 30 days prior to closing. Closing date, December 18th. Notice deadline, November 18th. 26 days. I read that paragraph 4 more times. Then I put everything back in the envelope, squared the edges, and set it next to the salt shaker. I went to bed. Here's what I haven't told anyone. I slept 7.5 hours without once waking up. First full night I'd had in months. Best sleep of the year. In the morning I made a list on the back of a work order. 3 items. Monday at 8:15 I called Bev Arsenault. She's been a commercial lending officer at my branch of TD for 19 years. I repiped the staff bathroom in that building in 2007. She still calls me Mr. Hutchins in front of colleagues and Earl when she picks up the phone. Earl. She sounded relieved and irritated at the same time. I have been trying to get someone to return my calls about that guarantee for 3 weeks. I'm calling about it now. Okay. Her chair creaked. Walk me through what you're thinking. Like I'm a customer, not someone you know. She did exactly that. If I filed notice of withdrawal, the bank would have to re-underwrite the operating line on its own merits. Hutchins and Wade Design Build, 2 years old, thin margins, no hard collateral, without a guarantor. The risk profile changes completely. The operating line, Bev. That's the one they run payroll off. Longer pause. Same instrument, Earl. Automatic freeze on the filing date. Is what I'm describing legal? It's not just legal, it's your right. It's been your right since the day you signed, and I told him so to his face. A pause. Send me the withdrawal form today. Bev. Yeah. Whatever interest is outstanding on the principal, any penalties on his end, bill it to me personally. I don't want the firm penalized for this. Silence. That's about $3,900, Earl. Then it's $3,900. What happened? I looked out the windshield at a kid across the street scraping ice off a car. I'm removing my name, I said. Not my goodwill. There's a difference and it matters. She was quiet then. Good, it's about time. Second call, Jerry Polson, insurance broker Guelph 1997 onwards, answers his own phone, keeps paper files. Earl Hutchins, what did you flood? Nothing yet, Jerry. Take my son's firm off the commercial umbrella policy. A very long pause. Here's what I never told my daughter-in-law. When my son opened the firm, he priced out commercial general liability and errors and omissions on his own. A 2-year-old design-build operation with no claims history gets quoted like someone handing car keys to a teenager. $14,000 a year, minimum. He didn't have it. So Jerry had folded him into my policy. Hutchins Mechanical, 32 years of clean claims, not one loss, not one incident. My son paid $2,200 annually. He should have been paying $14,000. I had been carrying that difference for 2 years and never said a word, because saying it out loud turns a gift into a ledger. My son knew. His wife had never once asked. Earl, if I pull him, he writes his own. That's 6 to 8 weeks underwriting, minimum. I know what the timeline looks like, Jerry. And his certificate of insurance lapses the day I file. Every commercial contract requires a valid COI before execution. He cannot sign a single thing. I know what a COI is. I've been handing them to general contractors since Mulroney. A long breath on the line. You want me to sit on this a couple of days? File it today. He did, which meant that somewhere in a compliance folder nobody had opened since September, a green status flag was quietly turning red. Third call, Vern MacPhail, general contractor out of Cambridge, 58 years old, built like a transit shelter, been putting my shop on his jobs for 20 years. He lent me his spare van in 2014 when mine blew a head gasket, and he never mentioned it again. Earl, you sound like somebody died. Nobody died, Vern. I need a favor, and I need you not to ask me about it. Ask first, then I'll decide. So I told him. My son's firm was about to lose its carrier and its credit line. 4 weeks, maybe less. Then I told him the favor. When my son came looking for references, and he would give him a genuine one, tell people the truth about his work. 10 full seconds of quiet. Vern never goes quiet. Say that again. He designed the Elora Street passive house on the edge of the conservation area. It won a regional award from the Ontario Home Builders Association. Tell people that. Tell them what it actually is. More silence, then his voice shifted. Earl, what in God's name did they do to you? I watched a semi-roll passed out on the county road. They asked me to be somebody I wasn't, I said. So I'm going back to who I was before they needed me. A long quiet on the line. Then, Earl. Clive Arden has been trying to reach Hutchins Mechanical for years. He told me so at the Builders Exchange dinner last spring. Every year he asks me why the best mechanical shop in Wellington County won't return his calls. I stood in my gravel lot and felt the cold go through my jacket. He does. Every year, Earl. Every single year. That was a Monday. By Wednesday my phone was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. I got up at 5:30. I pulled fittings. I ate lunch in the truck with the CBC on. I came home. I stopped doing arithmetic in my head that wasn't mine to do anymore. On day 4, my son texted, Dad, you left early Saturday, everything okay? I looked at it for 10 minutes. Then I typed, everything's fine, son, and I wasn't lying. For the first time in years, I completely meant it. On the Thursday of the second week, my daughter-in-law posted a gallery from the dinner. 11 photographs, the table, the candles, the wine, the light through the windows. Caption, grateful for the people who show up. I went through all 11 pictures. I am not in a single one, not a shoulder, not an elbow. I'd stood in that room for 3 hours and left no trace in it. I saved the last photo to my phone. Not as evidence. I don't have any use for evidence. I saved it because I knew a night was coming when I'd go soft on all of this. He's my son. Those nights always come. I wanted something to look at when they did. I want to stop here for a second because I know some of you are sitting there thinking I went too far. Maybe I did, but I want it from you straight. At what exact point does a father stop covering for a child who is ashamed of him? Was it the jacket? Was it the garage? Or was it the word handle? Put it in the comments. I'll be reading. And if you've come this far with me, hit subscribe, because the part where she finds out is coming right now. November 14th, 4:42 in the afternoon, my phone rang. My son, he was crying. Dad. His voice was in pieces. Dad, the bank froze the line. I set down my pipe wrench and sat on an overturned bucket in a half-wired utility room in Puzzlinch Township. I know. Payroll is Friday. I have 6 people, Dad. His voice cracked and came back louder. What did you do? I filed a notice of withdrawal on the personal guarantee, paragraph 7 of the agreement. Bev says I could have done it a year ago. I let that sit. Call her. She'll walk you through the language herself. A long silence. An office phone ringing somewhere behind him, nobody picking it up then, very small. Is this about the jacket? I closed my eyes. No, it was never about the jacket. Then what? It's one word. What word? Handle. My voice came out flat and even. You told your wife you'd handle me, not talk to me, not stand up. Handle me like a backed up drain. Nothing on the line, so I've been handled. I'm handled. He made a sound I had heard exactly once before, the night we got the call about his mother. He was 26 years old, and he made a sound exactly like that. Dad, please, what do I tell her? And here's the part I would take back if you gave me the chance, and I still believe it was fair. Tell her whatever you want, son. You've had 2 years of practice. I hung up on my own boy. My hands smelled like flux. I sat on that bucket and put my face in them. 11 minutes later, the phone rang again. Not my son. Earl, warm, bright, like old friends. I've been meaning to call. I think there may have been a misunderstanding at the dinner. I didn't say anything. You know how much I respect you, she said. Do you? A tiny recalibration. I could hear it happen. Earl, I'm 34 weeks pregnant. Her voice went soft and careful, and it was very well done. I am under enormous stress. My partnership review is in 11 days, and you're doing this to our family, to your grandchild. She waited. When nothing came, she reached for the last thing she had. A grandfather who would do something like this, she said, gentle as a slow leak. That isn't the kind of presence I want around a baby. There it was. I stood up off the bucket. I walked out into the November air and stood in a stranger's driveway in Puzzlinch, Ontario. You told my son I embarrassed you, I said. You put my jacket next to a donation box. You laid out a blazer 2 sizes too small and watched me wear it open all evening. And you introduced me to the most important client your firm has ever had as the man who did some work on the house. She had nothing. She knew it. I didn't do anything to you, I said. I stopped doing things for you. Those aren't the same thing. It's the most important difference there is, and you'd be wise to learn it before that baby is old enough to watch you. She hung up. 6 days later, her firm's compliance coordinator sent a formal capacity verification request to my branch of TD Bank. I found out on a Thursday afternoon. Bev called and told me to get out of whatever crawlspace I was in. The request asked the bank to confirm whether I had been in a sound state of mind when I signed the withdrawal notice. Whether, as an elderly individual, I had fully understood the implications of what I was filing. She had sent it in an email, not a phone call. An email, copied to 4 partners at the firm, copied to Cliff Arden's office because she needed them all to understand why the paperwork was delayed. Bev read me the relevant line, and I made her read it twice. The delay is related to a family situation. My father-in-law, an elderly tradesman experiencing some cognitive difficulty, signed a release without fully understanding what he was agreeing to. We are working with him and his family to address the situation. An elderly tradesman, cognitive difficulty. I hold a Class A unlimited gas fitting license issued by the Technical Standards and Safety Authority of Ontario. I have held it without interruption or infraction for 26 years. 6 men make no major decision on a live system without calling me first. She could have called me stubborn. She could have called me cruel. Both would have been fair, and both would have been survivable. She told a federally regulated financial institution, in writing, with a distribution list that I wasn't in my right mind. The bank rejected the request before the end of the business day. Bev had notarized my signature herself. There was nothing to investigate, but Clive Arden's office was on that distribution list. And Clive Arden, as it turned out, had been thinking about Hutchins Mechanical for 12 years. In 2011, his company had contracted me for a mechanical retrofit on a commercial property in Guelph. When I reconciled the final invoice, I found an overpayment. His project manager had approved a materials markup I hadn't charged for. I cut a check for $480 and sent it back with a note. Nobody in his office noticed for 2 weeks. Then his controller called, completely baffled. I hadn't thought about it since. It was his money. He called me from a number I didn't recognize. I was standing in a parking lot in the cold. "Mr. Hutchins, this is Clive Arden. I believe you may know why I'm calling." I knew part of it. Our compliance office flagged something on Hutchins and Wade Design Build, a certificate of insurance lapse. We can't advance a contract without a valid COI on file. That's between you and them, sir. It would be. A pause. Except your name was in the original credit reference package for the firm, and it no longer is. When a guarantor withdraws from his own son's company, that tells me something. I'd like to know what. I looked up at the flags over the building across the lot. "With respect, sir, that's a family matter." "I know it is." His voice shifted. "Mr. Hutchins, Guelph, 2011, the overpayment on the Carden Street job." The wind went out of me. "You sent back $480 on a change order my own project manager had already signed off. Nobody on earth would have known. It was your money, sir. It was $480, and it has cost me 12 years of wondering why the best mechanical shop in Wellington County will not return my calls." A pause. "I've been trying to get Hutchins Mechanical on my sites for over a decade. My assistant keeps a file on it." I put my hand on the side of a parked truck to steady myself. "I thought you were calling to complain," I said. "Every time I saw your name come up, I thought there was a problem with the Guelph job." Silence. "There was never a problem with the Guelph job, Mr. Hutchins." He was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to ask you one question. You can say no." I said yes. That yes is why 2 weeks later I was walking into an office tower in Waterloo on a Wednesday morning with gravel dust on my boots and pipe compound in the creases of my knuckles, and I had not wiped either of them off. My son showed up at my door at 6 in the morning on the day of the meeting. I was already up. He'd driven in from Waterloo in the dark and was sitting on my front steps with his coat across his knees when I opened the door. He didn't ask me for anything, not a signature, not a phone call, not one word on his behalf. "I found the receipt," he said. His voice was already going. "For Vern's van, 2014. You told me you'd traded yours in, that the new one had better cargo space." He pressed his hands flat on his knees. "You drove Vern's spare for 4 months, Dad," he told me, "last week. It came out of him and he couldn't stop it." The yard light buzzed above us. "I've been meaning to change that ballast for a year." "I let her put your jacket by that box," he said. "I laughed when somebody at my office called you the electrician after we told them about the basement Reno. I told my wife I would handle you." His jaw worked. "You drove 4 hours to move me into residence. You sold your truck to get me through 4th year, and you lied about it so I wouldn't feel guilty about it. You spent 2 weekends in my crawl space and wouldn't take a cent, and I told her I'd handle you." My son, 32 years old, licensed architectural technologist, 11 weeks from being someone's father, put his face in his hands on my front steps and cried the way he'd cried once before, at his mother's graveside when he was 17 years old. "I don't want the credit line," he said into his palms. "I don't want the insurance. I don't want any of it back." He looked up. "I want to know if I'm still your son." I looked at him for a long time. "You were never not my son." I stepped aside. "You were just somebody else's husband first. Come in, coffee's on." He sat at my table. I set a cup down in front of him. Then I said the hardest thing I have said to that boy in 32 years. "I'm not signing anything. Not this year. Maybe not ever. You want a business that's yours? You build it on your own feet. That's not punishment. It's the only way it'll ever actually belong to you." He nodded. He didn't argue. He went home that day and told his wife everything. All of it. The truck, the van, the guarantee, the insurance, the full account. And that is when she made the mistake that finished things. The meeting was on a Wednesday at 11. I drove up the 401 in the dark, got there 20 minutes early, and stood in the lobby of a glass tower in Waterloo in my union jacket, feeling the quiet of a building that hadn't opened yet. Here is who was in that room. 4 partners from the firm, a TD representative with the refinancing package, Vern MacPhail, who I had not asked to come and who came anyway and said nothing when I looked at him. My son at the far end of the table, gray as February. My daughter-in-law at the head with a presentation already up on the wall, composed, prepared, dressed for the verdict she expected. And Clive Arden, with one member of his team, seated along the long side of the table where the money always sits. She had arranged everything in that room, except the door opening at 11:04. I came in jacket, Hutchins over the pocket, steel-toed boots on boardroom carpet, and you could hear every step. The room stopped. A junior partner near the door began to rise, polite, confused, starting to say something, and Clive Arden stood up, 60 years old, 41 years developing commercial and residential property across southwestern Ontario. He pushed his chair back hard enough that it barked against the floor, crossed the room, put out his hand. Earl. He took my hand, compound and all, and he held it. He did not wipe his palm afterward. I watched for it. Thank you for making the drive. Sit here next to me. My daughter-in-law did not understand what was happening yet. She had about 90 more seconds. Clive didn't make a speech. He talked the way a man explains a business decision to a board, plainly, without theater. Before we go through the files, I want to introduce someone most of you already know by reputation. He looked directly at my daughter-in-law when he said the next part. Earl Hutchins has run Hutchins Mechanical out of Guelph for 32 years. His shop did the mechanical retrofit on my Carden Street property in 2011. When he found an overpayment on the final invoice, one my own project manager had already approved and signed off, he mailed the money back. Nobody on earth would ever have known. He paused. I've been trying to get his shop on my sites ever since. Last week, he finally said yes. Someone's pen stopped moving. Arden Green Commons has 2 Hutchins names on the contractor sheet. Hutchins Mechanical on the mechanical package. And, pending COI reinstatement, Hutchins and Wade Design Build on the architectural work. He turned to face my daughter-in-law fully, which is why the certificate of insurance flag reached my desk, and why I'd like to understand it. A pause. I also received an email last week, copied to my office, suggesting that Mr. Hutchins may not have been competent to sign a legal document. I spoke with him twice this week. He negotiated a 4-year mechanical contract with me, line by line, and caught a scheduling error in my own payment terms that my team had missed. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the HVAC. So I have one question, and I would like a clear answer. Which one of you is lying to me? Nobody said a word. Into that silence, my son stood up. He put his hands flat on the table. They were shaking. He didn't look at his wife once. Mr. Arden, my wife's email was false. My father is not experiencing any cognitive difficulty, he breathed. On the second Saturday of November, my father came to our home for dinner. My wife put his work jacket in the garage beside a box marked for donation. She introduced him to the most important client this firm has had as, and I'm quoting her exactly, the man who did some work on the house. One of the partners looked at the ceiling. She told me she was embarrassed by him, and I told her I would handle it. That was the word I used, handle. He looked around the table. He withdrew his personal guarantee the following week. That was his right. It had been his right for 2 years, and he never used it until we gave him a reason to. He also paid $3,900 out of his own pocket, so our firm wouldn't be penalized on the outstanding interest. He did that the same week we humiliated him in our own house. Silence. I'm not asking you to award us this contract, sir. I know where this is going, and I've made my peace with it. He looked at me for the first time that morning. I'm asking you to know who my father is. And I did not say one word, not one, through any of it. I sat in my jacket with dust on my boots, and I let other people say my name. That is all it was. That is the whole of it. That is what they had been taking from me for years, without knowing they were taking it. My daughter-in-law stood. She was composed. I will give her that for the rest of my life. 34 weeks along, standing in front of 4 partners, and the largest client her firm had ever been close to, and her voice did not waver. I think everyone here is overreacting to a private family matter. This is a personal disagreement being brought into a professional setting. Frankly, I find it manipulative. Clive Arden looked at her for a long time. You didn't call it a private matter when you copied my office on the email. A pause. You described a licensed trades professional as cognitively impaired in writing to a federally regulated financial institution. That is not a family disagreement. Another pause. That is a professional liability. He picked up his water glass and drank. Your firm keeps the Arden account. He set the glass down. You will not be on it. He didn't gloat. He turned to his team member and asked a question about site access dates. For the first time that entire morning, I opened my mouth. My daughter-in-law turned and looked at me. You were right about one thing, I said. She waited. I did embarrass you. Her eyes went wet. I never understood why. Not for 1 minute of my whole life. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. Not until I watched you try to explain me to a room full of people who already knew exactly who I was. Here are the numbers. Because numbers don't lie, and I've never trusted a story that won't show them. My daughter-in-law did not make partner. HR opened a file. Not for the family matter, but for transmitting false statements about an individual's professional competency to a federally regulated institution. Written reprimand. Partner review deferred 24 months. Removed from the Arden account permanently. They did not terminate her. 34 weeks pregnant, 6 years at the firm. They were never going to do that, and I never wanted them to. But her career moved backward 5 years in one morning. My son lost the architectural side of Arden Green Commons. He laid off 2 people. He drove to each of their homes to do it. He sold the car. He moved the firm out of a glass office in Waterloo into a leased basement suite in Guelph with a drop ceiling and 1 window facing a parking structure. He has not asked me for a single dollar. And me. Hutchins Mechanical signed the mechanical package on Arden Green Commons. 4-year contract, $2.1 million. I hired 3 more men out of UA Local 67, 2 of whom had been sitting since spring. I still drive the same truck. On January 9th, my granddaughter was born. Nobody called me. I found out from a photograph in a family group chat I had forgotten I was in. Welcome, Nora Jean Hutchins. Nora Jean. My wife's middle name was Jean. I sat at my kitchen table with my phone for a long time. On the 4th day, somebody knocked. My daughter-in-law stood on my porch alone, coat open, looking like she hadn't slept properly since November. Out in the driveway, I could see a car seat in the back. She didn't apologize first. She said, I don't know how to ask you for something after what I did. I stood in the door and did not invite her in. She told me something I had not seen coming. Her father had been a millwright. UA Local 1075 out of Sarnia. He died on a job when she was 9 years old, and her mother spent the next 20 years putting as much distance as possible between that life and everything that followed. She'd grown up being told, from the time she was small enough to believe it without question, that if anyone ever saw where she came from, they would take everything from her. I have been afraid my entire life, she said. The wind came across the yard, and I made you pay for it. She looked at me. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't want that from you. I'm asking if you would hold her. I want to tell you that something broke open in me right then, and that I forgave her where we stood in the cold. I didn't. I'm not built that way. My father wasn't either. I'll hold her, I said. Come inside. She brought the baby in out of the cold and put her in my arms. Nora Jean Hutchins, 7 pounds 12 ounces, red and furious and entirely uninterested in the circumstances of any of this. She found my index finger, the one with the scar from a pipe threading machine in 2001, and she held on with everything she had. I stood in my kitchen holding my granddaughter. My daughter-in-law stood by the counter, not taking her coat off, and I said what I'd been putting together for 2 months. Here's how this works from now on. She nodded. First, I'm in her life, not on a guest list, not by permission. That's not something you give me, it's something I have. She nodded. Second, I'm not signing anything. Not this year, not next year. Whatever you and my son build, you build it standing on your own feet. That's not punishment. That's the only way it'll ever be yours. Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. Third, I'm going to wear my jacket to her christening, and when somebody in that room asks who I am, you are going to answer, out loud, in front of everyone. She nodded. Fourth, I looked at her. If you ever tell anyone, a bank, a doctor, a neighbor, anyone, that I am not in my right mind, I will walk out of this family and you will not hear from me again. There won't be a warning. I'll just be gone. She stood in my kitchen and cried without making a single sound, which told me more about her childhood than anything her mother had ever said. She nodded. Good, sit down, coffee's on. The christening was in March, and when the question came, she answered it. I arrived 20 minutes early and stood at the back near the doors, which is where I have always stood. She saw me from the front. She walked the full length of the church. Every head turned to watch her do it. She took my arm and walked me to the front pew and sat me down. 8 minutes later, a woman from the third row leaned across in the way that certain women do, in the voice that belongs to certain rooms. And you are? My son started to answer. His wife put her hand on his arm. She stood up. In a church full of people who were waiting to decide who she was, she stood up and said it clearly enough for the back row to hear every word. This is Earl Hutchins. He has been a master pipe fitter for 32 years. He put my husband through school and sold his truck to do it and lied about it for 4 years so my husband wouldn't feel guilty. He replumbed our basement the autumn before Nora was born and wouldn't take a cent. Her voice held. He built the rocking chair my daughter sleeps in by hand. He is the reason this family is still standing. She sat down. He is Nora's grandfather. The church went completely quiet. Then from the third row, Clive Arden began to clap. The rocking chair went in the following weekend. I carried it up the stairs myself, and my son didn't offer to help, which was the right call. The Danish one went out to the garage. My daughter-in-law carried it there herself. I didn't ask her to. 6 months later, 1st August, on the Arden Commons site. 30 degrees, no HVAC in the upper floors yet. The building open on 3 sides to the heat. I was up on a scissor lift running a gas line when my son texted me 3 words. Bring her along? I texted back, get here by 2. He came at 1:45. Hard hat too big for the baby. He's not the architect on this project. He doesn't have that contract and he came anyway. I came down off the lift. I wiped my hands on my thigh, which never works, and I draped my jacket across his shoulders, the way you'd put a blanket on somebody. Hold that a minute. He stood there on an active job site with concrete dust in the air, and his daughter strapped to his chest and his father's jacket across his back. It's heavier than it looks, I said. He didn't answer. After a moment his shoulders started to go. 32 years old in front of 9 men, not one of them said a word, because half of them are fathers and the rest of them had one. I put my hand on the back of his neck the way you do. Yeah, I said, I know. I gave him his minute. Then I took the jacket back off his shoulders. Now give it here. I've got 2 more floors to do. I put it on, I buttoned it, I went back up the lift. The afternoon sun was coming in long and orange through the window openings where the glass hadn't gone in yet. Over my heart the stitching on the local 67 crest is getting thin. The yellow thread has gone the color of old paper. But you can still read Hutchins above the pocket. I never needed anyone in this world to know my name. I just needed to be allowed to carry it. They asked me to set it down. So I did. I picked it back up. That's the whole story. I've taken it all the way through now, and I want to step out of it for a second and talk to you straight. I want yours, not in your head, in the comments where I can read it. What is the thing about you that somebody once asked you to hide? Your hands, your accent, your father's name, the work you do. Tell me what it was, and tell me whether you ever stopped hiding it. If any part of this landed somewhere real, hit that like button. And if you want to hear what Vern said when he finally told me about the van, that story is linked in the description right now. Take care of yourselves. Wear the damn jacket.